Well, maybe it wasn't a pivotal moment in history, but it was important to me, in my memories. That's why our Girl Scout troop decided to nominate the carousel to the National Register of Historic Places.
I think that people are interested in preservation because of the traditions and memories that many of these sites hold.
It should be on the register to preserve it, to preserve the spirit of the community, and to preserve the history of the area.
And I think that it's important to show where we've come from. That's a legacy that we have to maintain.
It was really exciting to me to find out that my own grandfather's hardware store was an important part of our town's beginning.
Where do we find our history? Words written on paper give only a part of the story. Throughout our nation, districts, sites, buildings, structures, and objects document our past. These are the resources listed in the National Register of Historic Places.
Well, we used to go down to the theater on Saturday nights. I remember they tore down the theater and they put up an office building there.
The register came at a time when we were tearing down our history. We were a nation of the new, reinventing ourselves as we ignored important aspects of our past. Sites associated with ethnic or labor struggle were consigned to rubble. Objects and whole neighborhoods that defined important communities were lost. Structures that illustrated important engineering feats were replaced. Places associated with historic events became suburban developments. As a country, we were losing valuable historic resources at an ever-increasing rate. The National Historic Preservation Act of 1966 firmly established historic preservation as a national goal. The National Register of Historic Places is the centerpiece of that act. In 1966, the National Register began with a modest list of nationally significant historic places that had been previously surveyed and designated through the work of the National Park Service. From this list, the register has grown to encompass sites, districts, structures, places both ordinary and extraordinary, each linked by unique ties to a singular time and place in America's past. These are places that possess historic significance. They may be associated with historic events or trends, significant persons, or be distinctive and representative examples of an architectural style, engineered design, or type of construction. Archaeological properties can be listed because they contain important information about the past.
At one time we had two different options.
The federal government recognizes the importance of these historic places by requiring that their value be considered when planning federal and federally assisted projects. Tax credits for rehabilitation are available. The vast majority of properties listed in the National Register are privately owned. Listing does not prevent owners from doing as they please with their property. Private properties listed in the register do not need to be open to the public. The role of the register is to recognize the historical and cultural foundations of the nation. Administered by the National Park Service of the U.S. Department of the Interior as our national inventory of historic places, the National Register includes National Historic Landmarks, designated by the Secretary of the Interior for their exceptional value in illustrating our nation's history, historic units of the National Park System, and places nominated by state and federal agencies and Indian tribes. The National Register encourages preservation and provides opportunities for education and interpretation. By researching and recognizing these places, our understanding of history is broadened and deepened. The stories that follow give us but a glimpse of the vast tapestry that is American history. These are the people and places that bring to life the many stories of our nation. Americans using the National Register to preserve their past. At Jamestown, Virginia, English settlers built a town, planted crops, and started new lives. Today, an archaeological field study at this National Register site searches for the location of the original Jamestown fort. In doing so, professionals and volunteers from around the country uncover important information about the first English settlement in America and the early contact between colonists and Native Americans.
The Jamestown Rediscovery Project has two basic goals. One is to find out, of course, what James Fort was like, or find it. And secondly is to share these discoveries as they're being made with the visiting public. I mean, after all, this is really America's site.
I work with first graders, and their concept of time is very limited. A long time ago to them could be 5 minutes ago. And so when we talk about a long time ago, a lot of times we'll talk about the first Thanksgiving thinking of Plymouth in Massachusetts. And I have never mentioned Jamestown. And I've obviously learned that this is the place to start.
You can find out a lot about people. Archaeology is sort of even-handed. Everybody that lived here threw out garbage, so we're finding the stuff, the remains of everyone that was here, rather than just the top parts of society that were literate and could write it down.
We've had a lot of Indian artifacts of all different kinds. Indian pottery, flakes, which is the debitage we call it, from when they're working something to make it into a tool of some sort. And several arrowheads. This one's probably one of the best shaped ones we've had.
History is something that is more than meets the eye. There's a story beneath the ground everywhere, around historic buildings, even where buildings are gone. And the story is a dynamic story. It's not a relic. What archaeologists are trying to uncover is a way of life in a sequence of events. Time passing. That's an exciting part of a National Register historical site.
As America developed, cities and towns were built along rivers and other transportation corridors. Through individual and community efforts, citizens and professionals alike used the National Register to preserve not just individual properties, but parts of entire communities with links to our past. Communities such as Shepherdstown, West Virginia.
The National Register is a tool in that it helps to maintain what we have. The way of life, it still exists pretty much the way it was. It was a frontier town in the beginning, and travelers came here to the Antler Hotel and stayed. If Shepherdstown somehow got overdeveloped, buildings were demolished, dormitories were built along the main street, which is German Street, you would lose that rural village ambiance. You'd lose the history of the development of the architecture in this town. We have architecture that represents the early log houses, the early stone houses, architecture that goes right up through the 19th century to the turn of the century. It is a study in the development of American rural architecture.
We were interested in the building, the mill-run building in downtown Shepherdstown, and then we became involved with Jean Crolius. She explained to us that the building was in the historic district, and since it was in the historic district and on the National Register, that it qualified for historic tax credits. Once we ran the numbers knowing that, then it made it a worthwhile project. People, businesses come to Shepherdstown specifically because of the way it looks. So anytime we preserve a building in the same character as the rest of the town, as a businessman, it's going to increase the flow of people through town because we're maintaining a character. And this building is part of the character of Shepherdstown.
As you look up and down our main street, we quite often get questions from people, this is a marvelous little town and whose foundation funded all this? Well, it wasn't founded by anyone's foundation. The buildings individually have been purchased, restored, and maintained by individuals or by private developers who see the value of the standards that the National Register has established.
This has been a historic district so that the community is well aware of it and very proud of it. And people in this area are beginning to realize the value of preservation and the hand-to-hand effort with tourism. The National Register is more than a plaque on the wall. Properties that are on the National Register document our history.
The story of our nation is the story of many peoples. The National Register recognizes sites that are of importance to a particular people. In America's Southwest, the National Register is used as a mechanism to recognize important historic sites associated with early Spanish settlement and to preserve not just physical structures, but cultural traditions and a way of life.
The National Register was a tool for identifying buildings that were significant, the conditions of buildings, and to give us a baseline for assisting communities.
The whole community of San Jeronimo is on the National Register. It's a district, and the Church of San Jeronimo is a contributing structure in that district. What the community is doing now is reestablishing the mud plaster, and they intend to keep and to maintain the mud plaster. Many of the traditions that are used in building these structures are passed on verbally from father to son, from grandmother to granddaughter. And in order to pass the information along, certain sayings, certain idioms came together in the communities to help them translate the tradition to the next generation. For example, in New Mexico, there's a saying called "Un adobe sin paja es un adobe sin alma," and that means an adobe without straw is an adobe without soul. So you don't build anything without a soul, especially a church.
My name is Pete La Esperanza. My grandfather was one of the carpenters that built this church. So something told me to come over here and work on it.
There's a lot of family roots here. There's a lot of memories of very important things that have taken place here. I think that we need to keep it alive. First of all, we'll probably never see any more churches like this, built like this, with walls that are 3 feet thick. I certainly feel like I'm playing a strong part in the tradition and keeping it alive as far as fixing the church, feeding the people, and a lot of hearts and souls have been put into this church, and I don't think it should be thrown down.
I think traditional building materials are very important when you're dealing with a culture that is intact. It allows for continuity from the past to the present. In the words of Jose Gurule up in La Cueva, where the door has drugged the wooden floor and kind of dug a gouge in it, he said, "I want to leave that. I don't want to change these boards." This is what my grandfather did when he opened the door. For him, it was an immediate, tangible connection with the past. And I think in terms of cultural preservation, the best key to cultural preservation is working on historic buildings in traditional methods.
In Hawaii, one National Register building stands as a symbol for the Hawaiian people of the transition from monarchy to independent statehood.
Ali'olani Hale is the first major government building in Hawaii, and it was built during the monarchy in 1874. At that time, King Kamehameha V was in reign, and he desired a new government building that was of grand scale to show the world that Hawaii was a very prosperous, stable, and independent nation. As a native Hawaiian, Ali'olani Hale is a very special and important building, both historically and culturally. It represents a symbol from the Hawaiian monarchy. Kings and queens once walked its halls and debated in its rooms, and since it has been the home of the judiciary from 1874, there have been many landmark decisions that have been issued from this court, a lot of which have affected the Native Hawaiians directly. So because of the relationship between history and law, I think this building is a very important one that the Native Hawaiian community embraces. Ali'olani Hale was placed in the register in 1972. I think being on the register is important not only for the people who live here, but it serves as a symbol to the nation that this building is important because of its contribution to our national history as well as the state history. I think it's important for people to understand that there are very unique differences throughout the nation, especially in Hawaii. We have a very unique history, and I want people to know how it was unique and how we are different and how our system of government has evolved from the old system or the kapu system to present day.
We are a nation of inventors, improving our lives through constant experimentation. In Cleveland, Ohio, and Washington, D.C., partnerships of city officials, preservation professionals, architects, and citizens use the National Register to preserve the unique heritage of their communities and to help revitalize parts of the city's urban cores.
The Warehouse District is the oldest commercial district that still exists intact in downtown. And it's an area of older commercial and office buildings that is close on our public square, close on the historic heart of the city. We were suffering from random, sporadic, but a steady demolition of buildings. And we stopped it basically by working with the local Cleveland Restoration Society and our Landmarks Commission and the Ohio Historic Office, the State Historic Preservation Office, to study the area first and then to get our City Council and the State Historic Preservation Office to co-designate this area as a National Register district and as a local district. By passing the magic wand of districting over these old buildings, they changed their character, and people began to look at them differently.
This is a historic district, but you can't just stop by saying we're going to preserve and look at it like a Williamsburg, because this is in the heart of a downtown. We want to revitalize it and make it an active, usable part of downtown. For 40 years, it was kind of the backwater. We want to turn it around and make it an area that people really feel comfortable in, welcome to, and want to actually live in.
This building is called Lakeside Place. It was formerly known as the Ellen Gross Company building. It was a knitwear manufacturing building and had been vacant for 10 to 12 years. As an older building, it made wonderful conversion into offices, huge windows, big high ceilings, very strong floors, good soundproofing, good fireproofing. Knocking buildings down and standing up new brass and glass is not anywhere near as exciting or as invigorating as the intellectual challenge of refitting an older building with new uses. And I will say the market has responded. People love these older buildings.
I was born and raised in Cleveland, and I always wanted to have a barbershop in downtown Cleveland area. I looked all over in the suburbs for a small place, and I found that the rents were too high. When I found the Rockefeller building in downtown Cleveland had a space available, I decided to go ahead and start construction of the site in the Rockefeller building.
This area is probably one of the fastest growing areas in the city of Cleveland. There is 4 to 5 to 6 really quality restaurants that are just on this area alone. And in the next year or two, this area is going to be booming.
By living in this area, I can walk to all the different entertainment places, all the different shopping areas in downtown Cleveland. Don't ever have to get into my car. It's just a very exciting area to live in.
The National Register listings have been essential to the success of the historic warehouse district. The ability to be able to achieve historic tax credits, but also the recognition that these projects are valuable has played a key role in bringing other funding sources.
I don't think without the National Register designation of the warehouse district, we could have gotten the investor interest. We could have gotten the interest of the public officials in taking a bunch of old buildings that people were knocking down for parking lots and turning them into a vibrant retail, residential, and office district.
And a lot of people said, well, you know, let it go.
tear it down, and the parking lot's more than that. But there are a lot of people in the preservation movement that say, wait, there's history here.
It's the soul of the city. It's the spirit of the city.
By preserving the best of the past and modernizing it in a respectful way, we look to the future in a very unique and different way.
In Washington, D.C., the building known as the Whitelaw Hotel stands as a monument to African American self-sufficiency.
I was the project manager for the Whitelaw project. The project was initiated by the people that lived in the neighborhood who came to Manna and said, we have a building that's been sitting here. We see it as something that could be turned into a positive thing. Right now it's a blight on our neighborhood. You're a community development corporation. Can you help us?
The Jim Crow era was 1919, and that was the year the Whitelaw opened. It was financed in the black community, it was designed in the black community, it was built by black craftsmen, and it was run by blacks. So as a project architect and designer, I felt that it was my responsibility to make sure that the goals of the community and the people who originally lived there and the original developer, John Whitelaw Lewis, could be maintained, that when you walked in this building you could feel that you were back in the Whitelaw.
The Whitelaw Preservation Project was successful from many different standpoints. It was also important because it was an unusual combination of historic preservation and affordable housing. So for 35 units, as an example, there were over 350 applications for people who wanted to live there.
I don't know where I would get the opportunity with the limited income that I have, being a student and working part-time, to live in a building that is well equipped as a Whitelaw.
The National Register played a part in our interest in the history of the building. And I don't believe that we would have delved so deeply into the history and learned so much about it without having to go through the National Register process. The Whitelaw was truly a public-private partnership. It involved the city, it involved the National Register, it involved the State Historic Preservation Officer. It was truly a collaborative effort to put the project together.
What it embodies is the grassroots support of the neighborhood and people interested in protecting a cultural resource. The way it achieved National Register status was through bottom up. It's the original goal of the National Register legislation. This is a type of building that satisfies that.
America's past is often the story of individual achievement, of local distinction or innovation that helped shape a time, a place, a community, an entire region. The National Register is unique in recognizing the value of these local places. This grassroots spirit is reflected in the Register nomination process.
The McKinstry Mill House is a contributing feature of the whole McKinstry Mill district. This district is typical of many small communities in the region. The construction of a mill becomes a focal point for the community, and that's really the impetus for settlement around the mill. It's a very local process. It's going on everywhere, but there's nothing of national significance that happens here. It's just sort of everyday, ordinary life here, and that's important to recognize. The Ruths called me first, and they were interested in getting on the National Register. They had done quite a bit of research on their house and the whole settlement. It's interesting. In general, the homeowners come to us and express their interest in being on the National Register rather than the other way around. And so we try to support them and help them through the process.
We've been very involved in the nomination process because we had heard so many interesting stories about the people who had lived here and their talents and their interests. We thought the house itself was a real treasure because it had not been altered since it was built. And we felt that all these factors seemed to point to something worthy of the register. We feel like we're a caretaker of the house to the extent that it's a very old house. It's been here for a long time, and those who have lived here before have all contributed in some way to it. And we feel that we are just preserving it for future generations.
Where they needed help was in the technical aspects of a National Register nomination, in doing the architectural description and in placing the settlement in context in Carroll County. Then I took all the information that we had generated together and wrote it up into the National Register form to submit to the state for their review to determine whether it was eligible for the National Register.
The State Historic Preservation Officer is responsible for carrying out the state portion of the federal-state partnership, which is the National Historic Preservation Program. Properties cannot be directly nominated to the Department of the Interior. They must be nominated through the State Historic Preservation Office. The SHPO must decide whether he or she believes the property to be eligible. Does it meet the criteria of the National Register? The SHPO has a central role in the process, but most of those nominations really begin at the local level with individual citizens.
The process here at the National Register starts with the nomination package coming into our office. The package is opened and date stamped, and then the information is transferred to our data entry people, where they will enter that documentation into a computer database so that all the information from the National Register forms is on computer and accessible to researchers at a later date. The nomination is then given a technical and substantive review by the professional staff, and then if there are no problems with it, it is signed and officially listed in the National Register of Historic Places. After the listing, the nomination form is put back together in its packet and taken downstairs and placed in the permanent archival files of the National Register office for people to use, again, researchers, for publication purposes, education, and general information to the public.
This has been a sample of the places that have been listed in the National Register through the work of individuals, communities, and federal, state, and tribal preservation officers. The National Register is a tool for both education and planning. It is a guide that calls attention to historic places of national, state, and local importance. The National Register teaches us about our communities and gives us pride and knowledge in our surroundings. It is an effort by all Americans to preserve a time, a place, a history.
I don't really think it's the site per se, but mainly what has happened at that site and why the site is important and what does that have to teach us about who we are.
The great bulk of nominated properties are actually initiated by local citizens, by local governments, from the local grassroots level.
And the buildings are still here, the fabric is still here, and our history and social relationships can be preserved by preserving the fabric.
Enriched with a knowledge of the past, our national landscape is a living history, teaching us about the people and events that shaped our nation. The National Register of Historic Places, a resource as vast and diverse as America, a legacy for all Americans.